I'm Bob Shrum, the director of the Center for the Political Future here at USC Dornsife. Welcome to the latest edition of Mike and Bob Talk About National Elections. Mike's on his way here in a golf cart right now because he was held up in traffic. So for those of you who don't live in LA, I should explain to you that that is a not infrequent occurrence. The center does programming throughout the year, provides a wide range of scholarships so students who otherwise couldn't afford it can take internships, does major conferences. And our whole aim is to model and advance a politics where people respect each other and they respect the truth. Mike and I don't agree on a lot of things, although some we do this year. But we've been friends for the better part of 3 or 4 decades. And that's the way politics used to be in America. And hopefully, I have no illusions that we're going to do it on our own, but hopefully we can help move it back in that direction. I don't know if I should say this, but I think we are the center for this kind of endeavor and this kind of look at politics west of the Mississippi River. I don't think there's anything else like it. And there's certainly no other center where you have 2 people who are running it, one a Democrat and one a Republican. Mike will be here in a minute, and they'll mic him. And I thought instead of me holding forth all by myself, I'd take a question or 2 before we start. So if anybody has a question, raise your hand. If nobody has a question, yes?
How do you deal with the loss of evidence-based data? Like, someone says something and it's totally inaccurate, like totally verifiable. And just because you say it, it's the truth.
Well, that's our whole politics is poisoned by that now. You're right about that. If you look at Twitter, people say absolutely preposterous things that have no foundation in fact. Other people correct them, but it's a dialogue back and forth. And there doesn't seem to be, and we have not yet, and by the way, AI could make this much worse. We have not yet figured out how to deal with misinformation in our politics. And that's why people can believe. I mean, Donald Trump says he lowered the cost of insulin or capped it at $35. It's not true. He says he passed the PACT Act. It's not true. And I'm sure you could find examples on the other side, although not as egregious or not as many. But people choose to believe what they want to believe. You know, Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said that everybody's entitled to their own opinions, nobody's entitled to their own facts. Today, everybody has their own facts. They can have their own network. Social media means that you can always find someone who's going to agree with you. And people on social media, literally, and YouTube, are literally building their own networks where they agree with each other. So I have to be honest and tell you, I don't think we have the answer to that yet. I don't know if we'll ever get the answer to that. And I suppose the most important way to fight back for people who feel strongly about it is to get involved in politics or public life in one way or another, to make sure you vote, to make sure your friends and neighbors vote. But the other thing I'd say, by the way, is we have to get past the point where we think that all the people on the other side are bad. I mean, sure, some of them maybe are bad, I don't know. But we have to get past the point where everybody's an enemy. You can be an opponent without being an enemy. And here comes Murphy. So now,
I apologize for the dramatic entrance. I got held up by a bunch of thugs from UCLA. I gave them a math problem. They were stymied. I was able to get here.
so what the hell were you doing in Westwood?
Long story. Ask the cops.
All right, so we're going to talk about where we think the election is. We're going to go for like 25 minutes, half an hour, and then we'll do questions from you guys because we only have 45 minutes. One of the things I've observed this year is, there are a lot of polls out there, and people can get very confused by them. But you know what? There's one bonus. You can always find a poll that makes you feel good. So, Mike, how do you feel about this election right now?
Nervous.
Here.
All right, thank you. They gave me the square thing here,
That's
too.
for.
Oh, okay, got it. This is going to go down as one of the oddest elections in recent history. If we step back and think like historians for a minute, first time an incumbent president asked for a national debate before the nominating convention. First time a president in that early debate designed to cinch the political advantage did poorly enough, they were drummed out by the leaders of their own party. That's never happened before. First time that candidate was replaced by somebody who has not been on a primary ballot. And it was basically done by telephone conference calls. Hey, North Carolina, all in favor, say yes, bang, done. The Supreme Soviet didn't even work that way. And I'm not necessarily critiquing it, it's just different. It's not the norm. First time we've had a fine Republican nominee who's got multiple felony convictions. So, do you apply a normal template to this, or is it going to be something completely different? I would make the following predictions. One, it's going to be very close. Duh. Two, the 7 swing states you hear so much about, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, are going to move more together than separately. I don't think it'll be a 4-3 thing. I think it'll be 5-2 or 6-1, because they're interrelated. And there's a little too much focus on, well, what are the peanut farmers in Georgia going to do? It'll all kind of move together, I think. Who wins? Stay tuned. I will say that this race is a contest between 2 different huge forces. On one hand, Vice President Harris has the advantage of a lot of the little micro things in a campaign that count. She has more of. She has more money, significantly more. She has a more competent campaign team. That actually is a campaign team. She has the power of the Dobbs decision, which has proven in recent elections to be a powerful motivator and fundraiser, all advantages. In the latest polling, and I think we'll probably talk a bit about a shrewd buyer's guide to polling. There's only one poll, by the way, that counts, so I encourage you to only believe it's the Murphy poll. Whichever side you want to win is 1 point down. That is a good mental state to be in, and that's how campaigns ought to think about it. We have much too much polling overthink. But anyway, so she has all the little pieces of victory, and they add up to a lot. In a traditional campaign, they'd be an advantage. Donald Trump has the one most single powerful force. And he didn't create it, but he's benefiting from it. Even with all his perception problems, a lot of voters don't like him. Some really do. But I call it the 100-mile wall of lava, molten rock, moving at about 1 inch every hour. Try to stop it really hard. What is that lava? That is frustration with the economy. People saying, you're right, I was better off 4 years ago than I am today. And a perception of, we gotta fire somebody. When Joe Biden hit the rocks in that debate, people say, oh, he was old. That's true. People perceived him as too old. But why? They thought he was too old to fix the economy, which was the mainspring of their discontent. He was losing the race before that debate. His performance in it took it to a hysteria within the party. So voters want to fire somebody, and the question is now that Biden's gone, are they going to take it out on her, the incumbent party, or will she create enough distance to convince people, I'm new, I've got new ideas, I'm going to get you out of this middle-class economic pain that's the number one thing driving the election. That's why if Donald Trump were on better meds, every day he would say, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And people would say no. Again, I can get the economic statistics, doesn't matter. Perception is reality. And he'd scream about the border. But because he's Donald Trump, he's got other things he likes to talk about. That in campaign politics is a weakness, not a strength, because discipline counts for a lot. So that has made it a fair fight. Normally, that wall of lava wins because it's economics, I'm not doing so well, change the president. But she's got a lot of marginal things. I will finish with 2 observations from the polling. When we political hacks look at polling, we really don't look at the horse race.
We don't really care that much of who was ahead a week ago when the poll was taken. We look at the perception stuff, and I encourage you to go to the latest NBC News poll, which is done by competent pollsters. A lot of the media polls aren't, they're bought on a low budget, which says, who's better at fighting inflation? Who is mentally and physically up to the challenge? Who represents change? She's pushed the change number to 47. That's quite a trick. If she can win change, and if she can narrow Donald Trump's advantage on running the economy, which was 15-point advantage under Biden, now depending on the poll, it's 5 to 9 points. She keeps it down to the 5 or 4. I think she'll probably win. If not, if the last 2 weeks, remember mail-in balloting, so election is 10 days long, and it's about ultimately the economy, and she's perceived as 9, 10 points worse than Trump, I think he'll be back.
First of all, I agree with most of that. I would have to say, I think it's a little unfair to compare it to the Soviet Politburo. Because Joseph Stalin would never have called North Carolina. He would simply have called himself and said, what do you want to do? I think there are some encouraging signs for Harris. Mike just mentioned one of them. I mean, she's basically leading on who's the change candidate. That is incredible. I mean, she's the incumbent vice president of the United States. She has significantly narrowed his advantage, it depends on which poll you look at, on the economy. And I think that debate was important in establishing for people that she could do the job. In 1960, Kennedy, relatively unknown compared to Nixon, goes into that debate, and people say, I don't know if he can be commander-in-chief. They came out of that first debate saying, he can be commander-in-chief. And the Nixon slogan, which was experience counts, just went down the drain. That was helped, by the way, by President Eisenhower, who was asked at a press conference, can you name one significant impact on a decision that Vice President Nixon has had in the last 8 years? And he said, if you give me a week, I might think of something. And so I think she crossed a threshold in that debate. The convention was great, but the debate, I think people said at the end of that, she could do the job. I have to add 2 other things. One is Biden, no matter how much pressure he felt, doesn't get enough credit for what he did. And he really did decide in the end that he was going to put country before his own ambition. He had the nomination, no one could take the nomination away from him, and he renounced it. He then endorsed Kamala Harris. And the people, by the way, who think, well, it should have been somebody besides her, the Democratic Party would have torn itself to shreds telling the first woman of color who was vice president of the United States that she couldn't be nominated for president. So, you know, that was, for me, Mike and I had a slight disagreement about that. He's always trying to promote Gina Raimondo, the former governor of Rhode Island and the Commerce Secretary. I don't think that would have done quite as well as Harris is doing right now. The second thing is that you got to give Harris a lot of credit. I mean, she had to build the airplane while flying it in a very short period of time. Now, she was lucky. She inherited all the Biden-Harris infrastructure. She inherited that money. But she did a very good job. If you looked at the Democratic Convention, you looked at the way she's been campaigning at these huge rallies and the responses she's getting. So I don't disagree with Mike. I think this will be close. But I also think that he's right. These states will tend to move together. So it might not be so close in the Electoral College, which it wasn't last time, by the way. And she does have one other thing that we ought to mention, a massive cash advantage. Why Donald Trump is out hawking watches for $100,000 apiece, and he's going to keep the money himself, it's not for his campaign, when that campaign is in real financial trouble. They're being massively outraised, which means they'll be massively outspent. They also don't appear to have a very vigorous field program, and I tend to think message matters a lot more than field. But at the margins, when you're getting people out at the end, having folks out there to do that is an advantage. And she will dominate television advertising in this last month. Final comment. I promise it's final. The other thing that's weird, there's not going to be a presidential debate in October. The next big thing, if it's big, is the vice presidential debate, which I think people will tune into because they kind of think that Vance is weird and they'd like to see how he does. And they kind of think that Walz seems like a regular guy, relatable, someone who understands them. They want to see how he does. Now, something could happen in that debate that could have an impact. Normally, it doesn't matter. You know, Dan Quayle, Lloyd Bentsen destroyed Dan Quayle's political career with one line in a debate in 1988. And then a week later, there was a presidential debate between Dukakis and Bush. Bush did very well, and it didn't matter. But this may actually matter for the first time because we don't have any other events except traditional campaigning, barnstorming, giving these rallies. So anyway, you want to refute me?
Just a few things. Keep it interesting here. One, I'm not sure there won't be another debate. Whoever's losing 2 weeks out is going to want a debate, including Trump. So there's not another debate now till it's somebody's interest to have a debate. And with Trump's ego and everything, if he's losing, going down without grabbing the spotlight. So I think Bob's more likely to be right than wrong on that, but I think there's still a decent chance that they're spiraling out. Second, Bob's totally right about the money thing, although I think the Trump TV is better than the Harris TV, simply because Harris is trying to fill in the blanks on Harris. All Trump has to say is, she's the worst person in the history of the world. And if you go to turn on a television in Philadelphia, and it'll melt. She's got a spot up in my home state of Detroit saying that she plans to throw every auto worker in America out of work by banning the internal combustion engine.
She doesn't have that spot up. Trump does.
Trump does. I'm sorry, misspoke. Yeah, Trump does. She should have a spot up, but I've been trying him as an EV Republican to get something up because I'm worried about her. I'll do one critique of what is a far better campaign than Trump's, but I'm very paranoid about it. I think Trump can still win. I never bet against that wall of lava. And so I'm hoping that she can use her other resources to get around. They have gotten a little too timid. They know she's not good in TV interviews. Last one, not so good. Too robotic, too programmed. So they're running the Ming Vaz strategy. Avoid the media, avoid anything risky, one step at a time. Trump will blow his brains out and be crazy, and politically, of course. And that's not a dumb bet, but it was so, and again, I'm a fan, look, I've endorsed her. I'm part of McCain, Romney, Bush staffers for Harris, and I am a right-wing Republican. So I'm buying my Excedrin by the forklift load right now. She is not my normal kind of candidate, but to me it's a very, I was with Mitt Romney yesterday in Boston. We did something together. I had worked for him in the past. I ran his governor races, and he's no friend. So we did a joint thing at a class on entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School, and we brought a bunch of people in. Mitt made the great line, which is, I got 1,000 reasons why I'm nervous about Harris as president of the United States, but I have one enormous one about Trump. It's called character. And if you got to pick one, start there. So there's no way on earth I'll ever vote for him. And then stay tuned for more news, I think, from Mitt. But they're being too timid. The L. Smith dinner in New York, they're not going. Now, on one hand, New York's not a swing state. She's going to win it. But the opportunity to have a big moment where she shows up Trump again, like the debate, is gold. Never take your foot off the accelerator. Now, I know they're thinking, oh, he's going to wear clown shoes and yell and throw a cupcake at her, and it's crazy, and we're just avoid the thing. No, any high-stakes opportunity when you've got her. By the way, comedian called me up and said, it's a roast. Does she understand she'd have $100 million worth of free material from every comic in Los Angeles? We'd all send 2 pages in. And, she'd kill them. So when you have an opportunity to have another big moment to dominate 4 or 5 days, take it. You can't always be Ming Vaz. They're a little too timid. Story in the New York Times today. Oh, they're avoiding talking about, and this is in a thing I work on, so indulge me for 45 seconds.
They don't want to talk about EV jobs. I've run 6 winning statewide campaigns in Michigan, including 3 governors. Brag about manufacturing jobs if you want to win Michigan. Don't be shy. Instead, they'll let Trump define it. So I worry about that. I worry about the defensive, we won this thing, do nothing mentality that I wish I saw a little less of from their campaign. Finally, Electoral College. I'll give you, this will, I have assumption there are some Harris voters here, am I right? I would think so, yeah. Here's the scariest thing I heard all day. Got a call from a political hack friend of mine on the Democrat side. Got a call from the high command of the Harris campaign. We got nothing in Georgia. We have an emergency, everybody run there. Georgia's been a key state, one of the 7s for a year now, and the fact they're just waking up now scares the bleep out of me. Because if they don't win Pennsylvania, famously defined by our friend James Carville as Pittsburgh on one side, Pennsylvania on the other, and Alabama in the middle, they need to cover it. They either have to win Arizona and Nevada, she's ahead in Nevada, Arizona's tougher, or they have to win Georgia, or North Carolina, which is harder than Georgia. So little things like that worry me. That said, she has more ingredients of victory, and hopefully they add up to the right cake.
Actually, I'm not sure you're really Republican staffers for Harris, because you are beginning to sound like a Democrat.
Oh boy.
It is in the nature.
Low blow, Bob.
It
Low
is in
blow.
the nature, in this respect, it is in the nature of Democrats to always be worried, to always see the glass as half empty. I think Harris actually is being very smart in dealing with the media by doing more interviews that she thinks will have impact on the vote than by going in to one of these things where somebody's going to ask 10 gotcha questions. There is no more self-regarding institution in America than the press, especially the mainstream media. And they have made this a huge issue. Guess what? It's not a huge issue for voters. It's a huge issue for them. The Al Smith dinner, Bill Clinton
would have
was
said it.
yes, I would have sent her.
Yeah.
But there is a history there that's mixed. The Cardinal would not invite Bill Clinton to the dinner in 1992. Said absolutely not. And Bob Casey, then the pro-life Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, the father of the current senator from Pennsylvania, went instead and was not there on behalf of Bill Clinton. In 2016, Trump totally misbehaved at the dinner. Now, the reason I would have sent her was A, because I think she could be really good and terrific at roasting him. And then I think he might get up and roast himself.
Yep.
So that's why I would have sent her to that dinner. Look, there are a million decisions in a campaign. You make so many of them that obviously there are going to be people like me or Mike on the outside who say, well, I don't like that one, or I would have done this one differently. That's just the nature of the game. I think that the advantages she has are considerable. She's likable. People like her. I mean, I've never seen, somebody the other day pointed out that in that NBC poll, her favorability has gone up. We have never seen a development where someone's favorability went up so fast since 9/11, when George Bush's favorability went up at an incredibly steep angle. So I think people like her. I think if she can get by the fear, and she has to decide what attacks to answer, because she can't spend all her time on the defensive answering these attacks. Mike's right, she ought to be talking about how many jobs electric vehicles are going to create in Michigan. I think we may see that, but I don't know. I'll give Mike the last word and then turn this over to you folks. Hold on.
I'll turn the last word into an almost last word with a quick question for Bob. And I just think my campaign spider sense says they're stalling a little, and they got to keep the initiative. Stalling is not how you win. Defense is the art of losing slow. So Bob, who's gonna win the House and Senate? Because that's gonna be important. I'll predict Republicans win the Senate and the House, coin flip.
Yeah, I think Democrats will win the House. There have been some encouraging polls in California in these swing districts. New York is the other place where there's a lot of possibility for Democrats. That may be complicated by the Eric Adams indictment, the mayor of New York. The governor of New York has the capacity and power to remove the mayor of New York. It's only been done once by Franklin D. Roosevelt in the middle of the 1932 campaign when he removed Jimmy Walker as mayor of New York. But what Adams has done is assembled a coalition of minority coalition supporting him, standing around him, outside in the rain as he says, I'm not going anywhere. So if she removes him, does that alienate those minority voters? How many of them care that much about Eric Adams? I don't know. But that's the complication in New York. The complication last time in New York, by the way, was that Kathy Hochul was a terrible candidate. And even though she won the race, she probably cost Democrats 2 or 3 congressional seats. No, you can't have it back.
I'm just shocked that yet another Democratic official is going to jail. They can join half the LA City Council and a couple of governors of Illinois. Maybe we ought to try a little Republican municipal government once in a while.
Well, I do have to say, this idea that the Justice Department has been weaponized against Democrats is preposterous. Bob Menendez, Eric Adams, you could just go down the list. And there are apparently in New York City a lot of other Democrats lined up and that may be in trouble. But we could talk endlessly. Instead, I'm going to turn this over to you. And since we don't have a mic for people out there, we'll repeat the question. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Normally we're up on a stage and it's hard.
I think if you compare Harris to other prominent Democrats, it's hard to argue she's the most qualified. Say Gavin Newsom, governor of a major state, much more articulate, better in interviews. And it's hard to argue she's had a distinguished career either in the Senate or as vice president. So given that, it makes it lean toward identity politics being a big reason for her selection. Given that, my question is, do you think the election could be affected by a significant version of the Tom Bradley effect, where people are saying in polls that they support her because they think that's what they should say, to support identity politics and so on, but that when it comes time to vote, not that they're going to vote for Trump, but that they're just going to stay home because the enthusiasm for her is really based on Tom Bradley effect factors as much as anything else, at least among its.
It's the Tom Bradley effect. Tom Bradley was leading in the polls for governor of California and suddenly lost by, I think, 10 points. And a lot of people were lying to pollsters. My own view is that something like that did happen in 2016, that there were people who said they would not say they were going to vote for Trump because they were embarrassed, and there were people who would not say they wouldn't vote for Hillary because she was a woman. I think a lot of that's died out. I think the Trump people are more and more proud of being for Trump and are perfectly happy to say it. But I don't think we'll know the answer until the end. I kind of disagree with you, but I'm not going to go into it about how qualified she is or isn't. And I'm sure I disagree with Mike on this. But, she's been a DA, she's been an attorney general. In the Senate on the Judiciary Committee, she was very effective. And I think her campaign is a testament to this point, to her competence and her capability. And once again, I'm going to say, if you passed over her, I think you would have torn the Democratic Party to shreds, and we'd be having a very different discussion right now.
There's a difference between being a good candidate and a good politician. My old boss, Bob Dole, was an incredible politician, not a great candidate, and vice versa. Every once in a while you get a Bill Clinton who's both. The jury's out on her. We'll find out if she wins. As to your point, I'm not sure there's a distortion in the polling anymore. We have a lot of ways to get inside people's heads, and by looking at what websites they go to and a million other tricks beyond just a pollster asking them a question.
I do believe racism is alive and well in America in the subtext of the election. That's what Carville's getting at when he refers to central Pennsylvania. Must-win state is Alabama. And there's also weird, I've worked for and against a lot of female candidates, particularly for executive and governor and senate. And there's kind of an interesting phenomenon. When you're running for senate, you're running to be an advocate. Patty Murray, I don't know, maybe it was one of your races, had a great slogan, a mom against the millionaires in the US Senate. Because when you're an advocate, gender can be an advantage. When you're running for governor, it's weird. And the hardest group you have attracting, other than hardcore partisans who aren't gonna be for you on party, are other women. I did 2 terms for Christy Todd Whitman, the first female governor of New Jersey, who's a very progressive Republican. Never could carry the female vote. Never. She was pro-choice as the moon, I mean, all the way. But there's some complicated psychology there. So she's running for an executive office. The polling, the gender gap all looks great. Her problem is much more men than women. But there's some weird psychology out there, so we'll see how it plays out on election day. But I think it's something they should be thinking about.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to add, there is racism in this country. You see it in this campaign every day. You see manifestations of it. And there is certainly misogyny in this country. And Mike's right about that. Hopefully it's come down a little. Okay, there, and then I'll go back there, and then I'll come over here. We'll do as many as we can.
How worried are you about what happens if Harris does win? What happens after?
How worried are we if Harris wins? What happens afterwards? I don't think Donald Trump will concede. I don't think he'll concede even if the electoral vote is pretty decisive. There are shenanigans going on in Georgia where, you know, that somebody has said that the State Board of Elections, which Brian Kemp hasn't had the nerve to yet remove, although I think he'd like to, has said, well, we're going to open all the ballot boxes and count the ballots by hand before we put them through the machines and then try and reconcile them. That is the opposite of election security. That means you could do a hell of a lot with those ballots. I mean, Boss Tweed would have loved this rule. And so I think that will happen. I think you'll see Trump trying to stir people up if she wins. There is one difference. He doesn't control the federal government. And January 6th has already been declared a national security event, which means there will be National Guard, there will be police in the streets of Washington. It would be very hard to have a repetition of what occurred before. So, yeah, I worry about it. The other thing, by the way, is Congress passed the Electoral Reform Act and did a lot of things to try to plug ambiguities in a statute from the 19th century that's very unclear on certain things. It's now absolutely clear that the vice president's duty is purely ministerial. Open the envelope and read what it says. And by the way, they went after the idea of faithless electors, because let me tell you, if she gets 270 electoral votes, which is just what you need, under the old system, I am absolutely certain that there would be enormous pressure, incentive, whatever, to some random Democratic elector to cast a vote for Trump. Mike?
Yeah, in the old days, electors could do whatever they wanted. You just assume they'd do the right thing. We're out of the assume the right thing business now, and the Electoral College Act is fixed it. I'll be real quick. We got questions to get to. I'm worried about everything. A little less worried about that. Remember, American Army officers and Navy and Air Force, they take an oath to the Constitution, not to anybody else. So I think the guns are with the good guys, if it ever came to that. I don't think it will. I am terribly worried about one thing. We now vote by mail, okay? So election day is about 10 days long. It takes about 8 to 10 days to count it. Republicans invented vote by mail here in California, but President Trump, and they've said it's bad, runs on devil stamps, don't trust it. So Republicans now tend to vote on election day a lot more than Democrats. So it's very possible election night, and I have a commercial coming, Donald Trump's gonna be ahead. in the early vote. Big party, confetti cannons, and then over the next couple of days, she's gonna pick up and pull ahead of him. And what's he gonna say about that? Well, I'm glad the mail-in vote's coming in, I can hardly wait to hear how the whole, no, they're stealing it in Scottsdale. They've got people dressed up as mailmen in Detroit stuffing, and you know who they are, stuffing the ballots. So I'm leaning on my old friends in the networks to make sure we understand there's no one Super Bowl with the lasers and the explosions and Chuck Todd parachuting in with the latest count. It's 10 days long. Cover it that way. Train the country to know what they're coming for here. We're going to do the first inning. It's going to be a long inning ball game. And if you want to get a smart election night, having recently left my beloved home of NBC News after a great 20 years, we're announcing tomorrow Brian Williams is back doing a live election special on Amazon. You can buy a new rake and get the returns live. I'll be joining him, so stay tuned for that. We're going to try to do the smarter thing. I mean, we're going to try to drag Bob on.
By the way, he's a real loss to journalism, so I'm glad he's coming back. All the way in the back, and then I'll come over here.
So Bob, I have a question for you. You had mentioned that.
You're going to have to speak up, I'm really sorry.
Can
Or
you
come
hear
on
me
up.
now?
Or come on up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Come on
Come
down.
on down.
Yeah, we got a refrigerator to give away.
So you had mentioned that messaging is more important than field. But how for the Latino community, we tend to underperform when it comes to voter turnout. So field operation is especially very important, especially in a state like Pennsylvania, where Harris is overperforming with Latinos. So that turnout is going to make a huge difference. So what do you think about that?
I don't mean that field is unimportant. I meant that overall, across the entire electorate, message is, for me, more important than simply calling people and saying, please turn out and vote. But the Harris campaign agrees with you. They have a huge built-out Hispanic turnout program all across the country. And we'll see whether it succeeds or fails. So I don't want to be misunderstood about that. I'm not sure Mike disagrees with what I just said.
No, I'm in the message business. Message people. Field is a great way to burn up a lot of money talking to people who've decided not to vote. What works well is where 2 + 2 can be 6 is when you have great message and field helps people get the last yard. That's what works. When you have field alone, there's very little history in campaigns of field making in a high turnout election. Now, if you're running at midnight for school board in Barneyville, Wisconsin, and normally 480 people vote, and you figure out who has the most relatives and who's the most popular car dealer, and you drag 80 other people in, boom, you won. So field is a huge weapon in small turnout elections. In a big election, presidential is basically the difference between a presidential election and an off-year election is about 1/3 of the voters. So the Democrats have spent $1 zillion trying in the off year to get their presidential voters to show up. Well, in the Republican Party, our off-year voters are all our mean retired, Army majors who never miss an election. So we do well in the off year. So I think field is a force multiplier, but only if you have the message right.
We need that book.
Yeah, you need to have both, but message is people make 2 decisions in an election, who to vote for and whether to show up. And when they get somebody they hear and feel and want to vote for, field can give them a little help showing up. That's where, so I'm all for field in Pennsylvania. Here's a great example. There's a congressional race in California that may decide control of the House. David Vallejo's race down, and he's a very good Republican candidate. That is a Democratic Latino district. And when Latino turnout is up, he loses. He's been in and out a couple times. So that race will be all turnout. But in a presidential where there's high attention to message, don't get the message right, turnout won't save you.
Yeah, and so I'm not discounting, and neither is mine. And by the way, in Pennsylvania, where 10,000 votes might decide the election, having a field operation is probably a pretty good idea. Okay, I said I'd come back over to this side.
Yeah, variation on the first question. Trump has obviously established himself as a commander and litigator in chief. How would you handicap the likelihood that we end up in the court, that this ends up going to the Supreme Court, and that we end up with months of ambiguity on what results?
I doubt that that will happen. The question is, will this end up in the Supreme Court? Will we end up with months of ambiguity? That I do not think would happen. I think we'll end up with a decision. Now, what will the court do? My guess is, despite all of the fulminations that you can see on social media, many of them, in my view, justified, about the current state of the court, is that the court would do what it did the last time, which is get out of this. They do not want, I believe, to pick the next president. But since, the majority are all Republicans, Mike, what do you think?
That's how we plan to steal it. I used to have a Florida machine in my office with all the chats and everything from the recount with Buchanan and all them to drive my liberal friends crazy. Yeah, I'll never forget the time we broke in the warehouse. No, I'm not worried about that. One, he tried it last time, and courts all across the country threw him out. It's easy to do PR court stuff. I challenge, and you file it, and the news media selling clicks, selling glue to keep you watching TV, said, oh, major legal challenge. And then you can find a professor who says, Supreme Court's gonna steal the whole thing. One, to get to the Supreme Court, you gotta get through a few courts, and his record is 0 and 112 last time. So will there be lawsuit noise? Yes. Will it actually work through the judiciary all the way up to the Supremes? I think highly, and I'm not a lawyer, but highly unlikely. And I think on these institutional questions, as much as I know the Supreme Court are Bond villains to most Democrats, I'd be stunned if they go there. The judiciary, at every level, even in most ideological situations, hates screwing with elections. That's why some of these Trump convictions have been slowed down. And I talked to somebody who's a Superior Court judge, said, here we got to remember about our business. We are asked to judge upon the law, but 8 weeks before an election, when it's national media, I'm also making a judgment about who ought to win the election, and that's not my remit. So we always go slow on election years, because that's a horror to us, just institutionally. So no, I'm worried about a million things, but I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah. We're supposed to stop after 45 minutes.
they're
but
gonna
I'll
evict us.
do one. Yeah, they're going to evict us.
I know, we'll get to you, I can tell you.
Okay, something quick. And
We're
the
doing
only one of us
lightning
will answer.
round, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm from Pennsylvania. Thank you, USC, for rescuing me from 3 days commercials.
What county are you in?
I'm in Chester County. I'm
Vote.
on the border between Philly and Alabama.
Yeah, I know it well.
Yeah. The latest Trump commercials that are running in Pennsylvania now say, attention Pennsylvanians, President Trump will stop taxing your Social Security. Now, the national debt has almost doubled since Obama left office, and my question is, does anybody give a crap about the national debt, and is Kamala Harris going to come out and say, we can't afford to do that, or is she just going to say, yeah?
Well, she's not going to propose to do that. I mean, that was a deal that was made with Ronald Reagan to keep Social Security sound, which Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan, Ted Kennedy were all involved in it. So it raised more money for the Social Security Trust Fund. She's not going to do that. I think he's coming across as a bit of a carnival barker. I'm not going to tax tips. We're not going to tax overtime. We're not going to tax Social Security. Pretty soon we're not going to tax anything. And I think, except we're going to have a tariff that's going to raise the cost of all your goods by 20%. I don't think voters will buy that, but we'll see.
Super fast. I know we're only doing one, but they don't care and they should. Last year, first time we paid $1 trillion in debt, on the debt. Second, quiz question, you win an EV Republican hat. What percent of the budget does Congress actually vote on and have any control over? 27%. Everything else is debt and entitlements. And if we don't do something about that, learn Chinese.
Well, we'll see. I think we're going to have to stop, but we're going to do this really fast.
Thank you both so much for doing this today. It's great to see some debate. I wish there was a little more debate, maybe a third panelist who was a real life Trump supporting or libertarian perspective. My here we have this venerable son of journalism here at Annenberg, and many people would wonder what has sort of happened to the journalism piece of this election, because I actually heard you both agree that it doesn't seem like there have been quite as many hesitating sort of questions posed to, say, Kamala Harris campaign, and Trump, meanwhile, is just out all the time. You know?
Well, Trump is being interviewed by Sean Hannity, which for me is not actually a real interview.
He's very available. Maybe he's overly available, but I think the question is, with academia being so skewed in one direction and journalism at least being a little bit soft at the moment, what do you think that does in terms of the candidates we end up with?
First of all, the center is not skewed. We have had plenty of people who supported Donald Trump at our post-election conference. Last time, Mark Meadows was a guest, and that's a very solid commitment on our part. Mike and I happen to disagree on a lot. We just don't disagree about what we'd like the outcome of this election to be, but I hope we've been analytical today. I'm not here trying to advocate. I'm here trying to say what I think is happening. And by the way, I'll add, I think the center does an enormous amount for students here, and it does a lot beyond the university's gates to enrich the public dialogue. And so if any of you are so inclined, I hope you kind of think about it and maybe support us and go to our website and look at it, because there's a rich variety of programs and they are representative across the board of lots of different viewpoints. Mike, you want to take journalism and then we'll hang up?
Yeah, no, and I take your point. I'm, again, a right-wing Republican. Problem is, I've known Trump since '98, and he's the devil. So it's kind of hard to bring a chair in. Let's hear the devil's point of view. Oh, kill everybody. But you can always fire me and get a Trumper if you can pull one out of jail. And I know I'm insulting some good Trumpers, but I know the guy. I've known him 20 years. So, journalism is a business. They sell conflict. They gave Trump 7 times the attention in 2016 in the primary cycle of any other candidate. Why? Clicks and eyeballs. And I agree with the criticism, by the way, they were tougher on him than her in the ABC debate. On the other hand, he lies a lot. So it's tough to ask a quick question to somebody who's going to make up an untrue answer. Well, she will freeze and look dumb. So politically, maybe lying works better, but that's a bad incentive set. So the other problem is, it's true what Trump supporters say, that 90% of the journalists hate Trump. That's true. But he doesn't make a lot of effort to not be that guy. In fact, it's in his political interest to kind of attack them too. But, I used to have a sticker on my car, I won't read the Washington Post, because I thought they were all too liberal. There is a bit of a cultural bias. People confuse it, I think, and then we're stopped because they're going to evict us. A lot of reporters, I've worked in media a long time, don't wake up, I'm a Democrat. In fact, the Clinton people would say they were meaner to us than anybody. They hounded Clinton all the time for his crimes. And I think that's kind of true. They are culturally biased. Because if you wake up and I'm going to be a journalist, and you go off to Brown, and then you go to work at the New York Times in Manhattan, you do think people in Oklahoma are scary because they like guns and fried food. And you write about them like aliens. Because everybody you know is culturally very secular. I mean, I always challenge reporters, name a Republican primary voter here at the blank. And there will be a crusty old business reporter who still is. In the old days, they'd say, well, the publisher, for one, just fired me. But it is a cultural bias. So I encourage young conservatives to go into the media, but don't go into the easy media. Don't go write prompter copy for Sean Hannity on Radio Free That. Or for that matter, if you're a liberal, don't go to MSNBC primetime. Get into real journalism and culturally move it. Jeff Bezos pulled me out of something once and said, I just bought the Washington Post. What should I do? I said, move it to Omaha, Nebraska. Just culturally. Because when you're in the bubble, especially as a young person, you're in the bubble.
Yeah. I'm going to conclude by pointing out that in the latest polling, Harris is 11 points ahead in Omaha, Nebraska, in that congressional district. So I'm not sure that would have been the remedy that worked.
All right, Detroit.
Thank you all for coming. and see you next year.